He says, look at the formula. It's carbohydrates and oxygen and sugar. It's sugar, it's carbohydrates with nitrogen and phosphorus. So you got three things a plant needs. The plant needs carbohydrates, it makes its own, and it needs phosphorus and nitrogen. I said, well, what makes it work? It's a fertilizer. He said, well, he said, we studied 4,000 different surfactants to make it penetrate into the green surface of a plant. He says, and when you spray it out there, he says, you could drink it, you'd eat it. He said, don't get it in your lungs, though. That surfactant would make the moisture in your lungs so wet you'd suffocate.
Thanks.
He says, you could drink around it. It wouldn't hurt you, as long as you didn't just swallow. As you got your lungs, you'd swallow. He says, I'll tell you for a fact. He said, Japan got a big, high suicide rate because they're so crowded. And there's some people just ain't got money to leave the country or something. They just want to commit suicide. Too many people. He says, in the prisons are the same way. In this one prison, the weeds were growing up around the outside, and they didn't want to let prisoners out there to pull the weeds, so they gave them a 2.5 gallon jug of Roundup and told them to spray those weeds outside the fence. Well, instead of going out there and spraying the fence, they snuck off into a warehouse and got all their buddies in there, and somebody found a box of 4-ounce cups and divided it up 4 ounces against, I forget how many people, and divided 4 around it. What is it? How many ounces to a gallon? 128, like that?
That's right.
Yeah, well, 4 times that. Divide that by 4 times. So that's how many cups they had of Roundup for those guys to drink. They all drank at the same time. 4 of them got it down their windpipe. They strangled to death. The rest have done nothing. Nothing.
Wow.
If you're going to use it, don't get it on you. You don't want it penetrating your skin. And in the soil, the surfactant in the soil is gone, right? Well, all the people that I've told that story to, for example, I got a good friend of mine that's, he shoes horses. And he's got a little ranch of his own, and one spot of weeds. He said, man, Malcolm, he said, one end of this field is so damn full of weeds. He said, I hate to use Roundup. I said, well, go ahead and use the Roundup. Just use large droplets. Don't use a mist, and don't use a mist when the air's got these uplifts, you know, when the buzzards are sailing without flopping, because it carries the mist off to the neighbors.
Right.
I said, use big droplets when the soil is cooling. And you got to do it in some sunlight, though. He said in the afternoon. He did that and killed all the weeds. So he went and he said, Malcolm, when I plowed through that area where I killed the weeds, he said, I had triple the earthworm population. Huh. Think about it. You got all them weeds laying on the ground as a mulch like this, keeping the soil at constant moisture and constant temperature. And you got all them dead roots. What the earthworms feed on? Dead roots. So it attracts earthworms. And it can save our water, our land, our soil, if you use it properly. Don't let it drift to the neighbor on his crop when it's green. And you don't want to get it on you. You don't need it on you. Right. So use big droplets. And Dr. Elaine Ingham, well, I call Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's the world's foremost authority on the soil food web. You've heard of her, I'm sure.
Yes.
From Bruce and everybody, and Bob Webster. And I asked her about Roundup. She said, Malcolm, well, you are using this, it goes away in 4 days, there's no evidence. That's what she told me before I ever knew her. I called up her. And then so my buddy, Dr. Don Marks, a mycorrhizal specialist, I called him. I said, Doc, if you want to kill plants, is it better to plow them out or use Roundup? He said, well, if you give me those 2 situations, I'd say be sure and use Roundup. I said, why? He said, when you plow a weed out, you destroy the mycorrhizal fungi before it gets a chance to put out spores for the next plant, or seeds for the next plant. He said when you use Roundup, it dies slow, and that fungi realizes that plant is no longer getting carbohydrates from that plant. So that fungi quickly puts out seeds for the next generation. Huh. So it's got a lot going for it, but Monsanto makes it. Used properly, it's an excellent tool to be used in agriculture, used properly. There's no, now, until you get up into northern states, see the microbial activity, the soil has to be above 55 degrees before the microbes eat all the surfactant. And the further north you go, the longer the surfactant will stay there. You may get up around the Canadian border, that surfactant may stay there forever because you don't have the microbial activity. The soil's never warm enough for it to eat it up. So there it can get you in trouble. Not in Texas. So use it, just don't let it drift to the neighbors. And if you get it on, you wash it off, so what? Just don't drink it. If you do, don't let it slop. That works. Now let me show you the difference between chemical and organic fertilizers. I thought when I owned that big mill downtown, I bought it for pennies on a dollar because the SBA would take any bid. I bid $80,000 on it. It was worth about $800,000.
Wow.
They just wanted to get rid of it. Nobody wanted it. Somebody had to have it. They didn't want to pay the taxes. Anyway, I got it. I started making pelleted fertilizer. Had a brand new pellet mill in it. And I made a pelleted fertilizer, 622 formula. Well, Paul, my horticulturist, he gave some to a guy named Gerald Figueroa over in Gonzales Social Grove. Well, it'd be nice to Paul. Gerald tried it, these two beds right here, but the rest of it he used osmocote. He graduated from A&M 13 years earlier. And the best fertilizer they used to use was osmocote. They still use osmocote at A&M, everything. However, it worked now because Joe Novak, his potting soil is made by himself and it's all organic, so osmocote can work. Because you got microbial activity there to digest it.
Right.
Well, in this, there's no energy. When you use osmocote, it's a growing medium. Wait a minute, let's back up here. He said, pull up one of the better plants here and any plant here and look at the roots. Look at the difference. These plants plant same day. Everything was the same except this plant got my 622 organic fertilizer. This got that 14-14-14 osmocote. But the difference was when Sam Cotner came out to visit me when I first started farming organic, he said, Malcolm, it makes no difference if you use chemical or organic fertilizers because the microbes have to process either one of them to an ion form before the plant can use it. Well, that's fact. Well, in this rotten pine bark there was no energy. So the microbes couldn't process the 14-14-14. In my fertilizer, it's made out of all kinds of things that was once alive, meat and bone meal, alfalfa meal, cottonseed meal, blood meal, fat guano, stuff like that. I have a lot of energy. Even though I only had the 6% nitrogen, 2% phosphorus, 2% potassium, this was 14% of each. But the microbes couldn't use it, so it became toxic to the plant. He's been doing this for 13 years. Now he's clearing up, making a big profit. Anyway, Gerald used my fertilizer for 2.5 years, and then I didn't hear from Gerald anymore. I ran into Gerald at a home show in Alamo Dome. And I called him, I said, Gerald, who are you buying your fertilizer from now? He said, Malcolm, I live in Stockdale. They got big chicken houses everywhere. Yeah, I said another word. See how much money I said, how much profit I made. Now let me show you what a mulch will do. You know, I showed you that first picture, all that mulch laying on the ground? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is native tree trimming, this is pine bark. Laid, a cubic yard laid out 4 inches thick each. Set a sprinkler between them, and a few days later we had about 1.25 inches rain, and we had no measurable rainfall for something like, I don't know, 140 days, whatever it was. Hot and dry. Well, I went out with a moisture. I soaked these two, you know, soaked them good. The whole area around it got soaked. Anyway, several weeks later I went out with a moisture meter and I stuck it in the bare soil about 2 feet from those mulch piles. See where the needle is now? Dry. Then I put the moisture meter through either mulch pile. Look where the needle is now. For 60 days the needle stayed pegged out on the far side of the wet dot. The last reading I took was like, I think, the 104th or something like that day. I forget what it was. I have to look it up. The needle got right here between wet and moist. Then the rain came and ended the test.
Wow.
I think it was 110 days, 110 or 120 days. I forget what's in my book. 120 days, the needle never got past wet. It stayed wet all the time. Never got into the moist area. Forces of mulch. So you put that over the root zone of the plant, and you probably never have to water.
Yeah.
One day the ambient temperature was 104 degrees in the afternoon. This is in August, late July, August. Soil temperature an inch and a quarter deep was 120. Now I knew why my feet burned running out there.